Today, we will be discussing the topic of racism. So the question will then be, why racism? This is because we believe that racism is a serious issue which has been around for a long period of time but is not addressed enough. Racism was and is still happening worldwide despite being often projected on social media and various other platforms. Racism is the belief that humans should be divided into different categories and be treated differently due to their race according to Smetley 2023. Racism is more than just being prejudiced towards another race through thoughts and action, as it results in discrimination and even human rights issues. Every human should be entitled to the same human rights and no one should be treated differently from others just by being different. Malaysia, as a multiracial country with three main races, also faces the problem of racism. This is heartbreaking, but this issue can be easily noticed when it comes to the dealing of house renting to tenants of different races.
Let's get in depth about the background of racism before we advance further. Racism has been a major problem around the globe for almost forever. It doesn't have an exact date where it started this global issue. It happens anywhere, anytime, any place, and it is daunting to even think of solving this problem. Racism is fabricated by different race beliefs, different behaviors, traits, and different social status. When it comes to racism, it has four different types. Firstly, it is individual or internalized racism that revolves around individuals, while interpersonal racism is between individuals and compares different between groups. So, for the second one, racism is caused by different races and cultures, often portrayed in a victim and a perpetrator model. The third type of racism is mostly due to different cultural practices and how a person is brought up in that way where they think it's normal to treat others in a negative way, which perpetuates racial inequality. There are many more examples in the US back in 1626 till 1860s period, where the African Americans were treated horribly. For an example, the Jim Crow laws created legal separation by race of Americans, prohibiting different colored Americans from studying together and staying together in the same neighborhood, and making it illegal to marry someone of another races. Lastly, the last type of racism is structural racism, which is a societal sickness that can be difficult to solve and is pervasive, cumulative, and durable, which making it more difficult to face in modern society. So let's back to the primary question there. When does racism begin? Racism in the 20th century saw the rise and fall of overt racist regimes, such as the Nazis in Germany, who attempt to exterminate the entire ethnic group of mankind, and that's what ultimately influenced it. Racism happens all around the world, and even here, Malaysia, it is also a major issue as a Malaysian education leader does not put enough effort towards the topic racism in the education system. Malaysia is a country that contains multiple different races and religions, which actually plays a very huge role in making this country unique compared to other countries. However, there are a lot of reported cases of racism which cause a huge misunderstanding towards different races, which deepens the hatred of each race in multiple ways. Let's take a case back in 2017, where there was a hotel industry in the spotlight over no headscarf uniform policy. In other instances, political representatives in Malaysia promote racism which affects youngsters following the footsteps of an inappropriate belief. By UMNO Supreme Council member Tan Sri Anwar Musa, quoting that, "I am a racist." However, he said that his racism is based on Islam. This incident happened back on the 16th of September 2015 Red Shirt Rally. After the day he delivered his speech, he defended his own admission on Facebook, which claimed that Chinese and Indians are also the same. In his Facebook post, which directly translates the racism in the sense of love or affection for one's own race in a nature which is outrageous. Racism in the sense of love or affection for one's own race, which such leaders in Malaysia, it will only lead to more Malaysia having suffered discrimination due to race, skin color, religion, ethnic origin, and descent of decades, leading to xenophobia. Based on a previous studies report, it summarized the total racial discrimination cases in 2017. In the report, 6 trends was highlighted in the report. The first, racial and religious discrimination. Second, racial discrimination in other industries. Third, group, agencies, and individuals that use provocative racial sentiments. Fourth, political groups, hate speech, and racial statements. Fifth, entrenched racism among Malaysians. Sixth, xenophobic behaviors. The purpose of the report was to promote social cohesion and national unity and to gain recognition and acknowledgement of the severity of the issue. In conclusion, for this background studies and research, our core question is, what is racism in Malaysia?
Throughout the research, we have collected quantitative data through a survey related to racism. As racism is a well-known topic in our current society, we decided to prioritize quantitative data and collect over 60 responses to our survey. Through the survey, we will be able to study their views and thoughts towards racism. The following are the questions we have asked in our survey. What is your race? Have you heard of racism? How did you came across this issue? How often do you come across racism? Where do you think people encounter racism? Why do you think racism happens? How serious do you think the issue is? Do you think the seriousness of racism is talked about enough? Do you believe that racism is correlated with social problems? How likely are you to help a person that is facing racism? Have you yourself encountered this issue before? How likely are you to speak out and seek for help? Do you believe racism can be stopped?
Now, let us review the result we have gotten from the survey of 61 respondents. Total of 61 respondents consisting of 5 races participated in our survey, with Chinese being the majority by taking up 67.2%. 98.4% of respondents have heard of racism and are aware of the issue. As social media plays a big part in most of our lives, most respondents have heard of racism through social media. 21.3% of respondents have heard it from friends and family, and 13.1% of respondents have heard it from news or blog. The seriousness of racism can be reflected by the data collected, and a whopping 8 out of 61 respondents had experienced racism themselves before, which is saddening. 40% of respondents, which is equivalent to 24 respondents, often encounter racism where racism is not common among the remaining respondents. Respondents believe that racism is most common at public areas, workplace, and at school. There are 3 respondents who believe that racism can or is happening everywhere around them. The respondent also believes that false perception towards another race is the main reason why racism happens. This is common as people often judge another race who know nothing of. Sense of identity and peer pressure are also main reasons for racism in Malaysia. There's also one respondent who believes that ignorance of the people around leads to racism, as no one is willing to stand up and help the victims. Respondents were asked to rate the seriousness of racism for very serious to not serious. A large majority believe that racism is serious in Malaysia. However, there are some respondents who also believe that racism is not serious. When asked about whether the seriousness of racism is talked about enough, the majority of respondents voted that it's not enough, and the public should be more aware of this issue. 83.6% of respondents also vote for yes when asked about whether racism is correlated with social problems. If the public is not aware of the seriousness of racism in Malaysia, more social problems will be arise simultaneously. 29 out of 61 respondents were unlucky and had encountered racism before. Considering the high percentage of people who have fallen victim to racism, this issue should be taken more seriously to help stop it. When asked upon how likely one is to speak up and say up from likely to not likely, most respondents choose to stay neutral. Victims of racism should not be ashamed and seek help in any way possible. When asked if racism can be stopped, 72.1% of respondents vote for yes, and the remaining 27.9% vote for no.
Today, I'm going to talk about the finding and discussion. With all that, let's look at what are the findings and discussion we have managed to get our hands on. Firstly, on the logic side of perspective, racism persists in Malaysia due to a fundamental tribalism that allows groups and individuals to believe they are superior. This is difficult to change from black to white, just as it is difficult to change culture and belief. And the goal of racial dominance is simply dominance, not social reform. Individuals are harmed by racism because it singles them out for abuse and or attack based on characteristics they cannot change. The deeper aspects of racism have been overlooked in all of these political, social, and contemporary debates as the feature of free speech continue. Secondly, from the view of psychology and sociology, the module of how racism is seen as a problem that only exists in some prejudiced individuals can lead to an underestimation of the problem can be described as a methodical approach to understanding racism and its implication in psychology. It emphasizes the importance of historical, cultural, legal, political, and economic system in reproducing contemporary forms of racism. Racism sociology focuses on overtly racist attitudes and policies, while prevalence methods for studying racism are both socially and analytically important. It has discovered how racial inequality persists in so-called post-racial society.
Now, on epistemology, the research study conducted found that 67.2% of respondents have heard of racism and are aware of the issue. 8 out of 61 respondents had experienced racism themselves before, which is saddening. Victims of racism should not be ashamed and seek help in any way possible. A large majority believe that racism is serious in Malaysia, but there are some who believe it is not serious. It is shown that false perception toward another race is main reason why racism happens, while sense of identity and peer pressure are also main reasons. Racism is most common in public area, workplace, and school, and could be stopped with a lot of hard work, education on culture. According to the ideology of modernism, modernism is explained as a global movement that seeks a new lifestyle and align with the experience and value of modern life. It rejects all social structures and provides individualism with freedom of choices. Modernism helps us change our perspective and way of life that will impact the world and society that we live.
For example, people no longer treat people with skin color difference differently, and there's no double standard. Lastly, the philosophy of Sejahtera plays an important and crucial role in reducing the practice of racism, as its principle can help victims and everyone around the world free from racism and create a more ethical and harmonious living environment. It is based on various dimensions of life, such as physical, ecology, spiritual, intellectual, emotion, economy, political, governance, educational, social, cultural, and religious, and can be used to create a well-balanced community without discrimination.
In conclusion, racism is caused by different races and cultures and is often portrayed in a victim and perpetrator model. In the United States, racial inequality is mostly due to the enslavement industry. In Malaysia, a survey of efforts to combat racism, racial and religious discrimination was recorded and arranged into graphs to show the total percentage of Malaysians willing to put in efforts to combat racism, racial discrimination and xenophobia. The study of racism, racial discrimination and racial inequality is known as racism sociology, and one respondent believes that ignorance of the people around leads to racism as no one is willing to stand out and help the victims.